History often whispers secrets, concealing profound truths behind familiar tales. What if the towering figures and dramatic events we think we know are merely shadows of a deeper, more complicated reality? Tonight, we peel back the layers of the past, seeking out the unseen struggles, the shocking revelations, and the untold stories that truly shaped our world. From the haunted mind of a president to the vanished cities of ancient empires, and the silent terrors of a forgotten war. Get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew. What if the man revered as America's greatest president was haunted by a darkness few truly understood? Abraham Lincoln, the humble rail splitter who guided a broken nation, carried a profound and relentless burden throughout his entire life, a crippling melancholy. This wasn't merely sadness. It was a deep, persistent depression that his contemporaries often called the hypo, a suffocating emotional weight that left him prone to intense bouts of despair. His famously quiet, sometimes distant demeanor was not shyness, but a testament to his constant internal battle against this unseen foe. He would often withdraw into himself, lost in thought, his eyes betraying a sorrow that few could penetrate. Yet, it was this very struggle that arguably sharpened his extraordinary capacity for empathy. Having wrestled with his own profound grief and emotional torment, Lincoln possessed an unparalleled ability to understand the suffering of others, a crucial trait in a leader tasked with healing a fractured nation. This hidden pain, rarely emphasized in textbooks, was a quiet furnace that forged his unique blend of strength and compassion, allowing him to connect with the raw anguish of the Civil War in a way no other leader could. Despite his inner turmoil, Lincoln's rise from abject poverty was a masterclass in strategic self-creation, particularly the crafting of his legendary Honest Abe persona. Born on a cold dirt floor in a Kentucky log cabin, without formal schooling or family connections, Lincoln understood that trust was his most potent currency in the rough-and-tumble world of frontier politics. The stories are numerous, and often true, of his meticulous honesty, walking miles just to return a few cents of overpayment to a customer, or consistently returning borrowed books and tools in better condition than he received them. These seemingly simple, everyday acts were deliberate investments in his public image, building an unshakable foundation of credibility in a distrustful era. In New Salem, Illinois, where he arrived penniless, and later as a lawyer in Springfield, his unwavering integrity became his most potent weapon, earning him not just a nickname, but an almost sacred reputation. People liked him, certainly, but more importantly, they believed him, an invisible power that would, against all odds, propel a self-taught country lawyer onto the national stage, confounding the political establishment who underestimated his quiet strength. Behind the public facade of the rising politician lay a far more turbulent private life, marked by intense passion and profound grief. His marriage to Mary Todd was anything but simple. It was a tempestuous, often explosive union of two strong-willed individuals. Mary herself battled deep emotional instability, a condition that likely worsened after the deaths of their children, manifesting in fiery temperaments and bouts of irrationality. Their love for each other was undeniable, but so were the public and private storms that raged within their household. The true heartbreak, however, came from the relentless touch of death. Of their 4 sons, only Robert would live to adulthood. The loss of Edward at just 4 years old left an early, invisible wound, but the death of his beloved Willie, at age 11 from typhoid fever inside the White House, tore at the very fabric of his being. While the nation watched him guide a war, Few saw the man who spent long nights alone, sometimes even visiting his son's grave, carrying a grief so profound it seemed almost unbearable. This intimate familiarity with sorrow profoundly shaped his empathy for the nation's suffering, allowing him to speak of national sacrifice with a depth of feeling few others could summon. The presidency thrust Lincoln into an impossible position, burdened with the crushing weight of a nation tearing itself apart. The Civil War was not a conflict he sought, but one he faced with agonizing resolve, his decisions often made in the lonely hours of the night. His leadership was far from universally praised. Newspapers openly mocked his lanky appearance and backwoods manner. Generals frustrated him with their inaction, and even members of his own cabinet questioned his every move, sometimes plotting against him. He fired general after general, desperately searching for someone who could match the urgency and scale of the conflict, a grim process that wore heavily on his soul. The Emancipation Proclamation, often viewed as a purely moral declaration, was in fact a brilliant, controversial military gamble. It didn't instantly free every enslaved person, but it irrevocably transformed the war from a fight to merely preserve the Union into a moral battle to redefine it, pushing the boundaries of what America truly stood for. This radical shift was met with fervent support from abolitionists and bitter condemnation from those who saw it as an overreach, putting Lincoln under unprecedented, constant pressure, his every word and action scrutinized. In the end, Lincoln's profound vision for a unified, healed America was tragically silenced. Just 5 days after the Confederacy's surrender at Appomattox, his life was violently taken by an assassin's bullet in a Washington, D.C. theater. The nation, which had just begun to breathe a collective sigh of cautious relief, plunged into a raw, pervasive grief that swept from city to countryside. Church bells tolled for hours, businesses closed, and entire cities fell silent in mourning. His body was placed on a grand funeral train that journeyed for nearly 2 weeks, all the way back to his home in Springfield, Illinois. Along the route, millions lined the tracks, standing in stunned silence as the train passed. A final, solemn farewell to the man who had held them together during the country's darkest hour. His assassination tragically cemented his legacy, transforming a complex, often criticized leader into an almost mythical martyr. But it also meant he would never get the chance to guide the country through the painful, messy, and often brutal process of Reconstruction, the very healing he had spoken of with such grace, with malice toward none, with charity for all. His death left a profound void, a compass lost just as the stormy seas began to calm. Yet his ghost and his ideals would continue to shape the American identity for centuries to come, a silent testament to the man behind the myth. But what about another group of fierce individuals whose reputation for barbarity has long overshadowed their true complexity? Forget the horned helmets and savage cliches. The true Vikings were far more complex, their impact more profound than mere plunder. These Norsemen, seafaring tribes from modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, were not a single, unified people, nor were they solely wild warriors. The term Viking itself was often a verb. To go Viking meant to embark on an expedition, sometimes for trade, sometimes for raiding, sometimes for exploration. Most of these Vikings were, in fact, farmers, tethered to the harsh, unforgiving landscapes of their homelands. They were also skilled blacksmiths, master shipbuilders, eloquent poets who sang epic sagas, and keen storytellers who preserved their history through oral tradition. They lived in an environment defined by long Brutal winters and short, intense summers. A relentless struggle against nature. This constant fight for survival, coupled with limited arable land and a burgeoning population, forged a people fiercely adaptable, driven by a boundless curiosity and an unyielding desire for opportunity. It was this deep-seated ambition, not just bloodlust, that pushed them far beyond their frozen fjords, seeking new lands, new wealth, and new destinies. If the Vikings held one unmatched advantage, it was their ships, particularly the legendary longship. These were not merely boats. They were engineering marvels, true symbols of both freedom and fear. Carved from flexible yet strong oak, their overlapping planks were meticulously sealed with tar and animal hair, allowing the hulls to flex with the waves rather than fighting them, providing extraordinary stability in the roughest open oceans. The average longship, typically around 20 to 30 meters long, could carry 40 to 60 warriors, along with provisions and tools, at surprising speeds. But their true genius lay in their unparalleled adaptability and shallow draft design. They could navigate vast, stormy seas, cross oceans, and then glide silently up narrow rivers, often sailing in mere feet of water. This allowed them to strike deep inland, far from the predictable coastal defenses where no one expected them. They needed no elaborate harbors, just a stretch of beach or a shallow riverbank, meaning they could land, strike, and vanish with terrifying speed. The sight of a dragon-headed prow on the horizon quickly became the stuff of nightmares across Europe, a chilling premonition of fast, unexpected, and often ruthless trouble, changing the psychology of coastal communities forever. The world first truly noticed the Vikings on a quiet summer day in 793 CE, when they descended upon the holy island of Lindisfarne, just off the northeastern coast of England. Without warning, negotiations, or mercy, they struck a peaceful monastery, a sanctuary of learning, prayer, and devotion. Axes flashed, monks were slaughtered or enslaved, and sacred relics, gold and silver, were plundered. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a profound psychological shock to Christian Europe, who believed their holy sites were divinely protected. The wrath of the Northmen became a chilling refrain in chronicles, painting them as merciless, godless demons. Yet, Lindisfarne was only the beginning of a surprising, far more complex transformation. Within decades, these barbarians weren't just raiding, they were settling. Towns like Dublin and Wexford in Ireland began as simple Viking outposts, growing from temporary camps into thriving trading hubs and eventually major medieval cities. In northern England, the Vikings carved out a vast territory called the Danelaw, land under Norse control where Viking law, not English rule, was enforced. In France, a pivotal shift occurred in 911 CE when a powerful Viking leader named Rollo made a deal with the Frankish king Charles the Simple, receiving land in exchange for peace and conversion. This region became known as Normandy, literally, the land of the Northmen, where Norse culture slowly, irrevocably blended with Frankish traditions, proving they were not just destroyers, but formidable founders of new societies to understand. The Vikings, you must look beyond the axe and into their profound spiritual beliefs. Their world was steeped in a rich cosmology of gods, giants, spirits, and an all-consuming sense of fate, believed to be literally woven by three mysterious beings known as the Norns. At the heart of their mythic universe was Odin, the One All-Father, a complex deity of wisdom, war, and poetry, who had traded one of his eyes for knowledge, an eternal seeker, much like the Vikings themselves. Thor, the thunder god, wielding his mighty hammer Mjolnir, was a beloved protector of both gods and humans from the forces of chaos. Many Vikings wore miniature Thor's hammers as amulets of strength and courage. Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, and war, also played a central role, said to claim half the souls of fallen warriors for her own hall. But the ultimate belief, shaping their daring, revolved around death. To die bravely in battle was to earn a glorious place in Valhalla, Odin's golden hall, where warriors would feast, fight, and celebrate until the end of days. This powerful myth, not a distant story but a living guide, meant death was not something to fear, but an opportunity for eternal honor. To die without glory, of sickness or old age, was the greatest tragedy. Yet, even as they sailed into battle, their spirit of unyielding curiosity led them far beyond Europe. Their restless, daring curiosity led them to explore lands unknown centuries before the traditional age of exploration. They pushed west, settling Iceland in the late 9th century, a windswept island where Norse families built farms, established one of the world's oldest parliaments, and meticulously recorded their history in epic sagas of gods, ghosts, and heroic voyages. But even that distant land wasn't far enough. By the late 10th century, Eric the Red, an exiled chieftain, sailed even further west, reaching a vast icy coastline he named Greenland, hoping the appealing name would attract settlers. It worked, establishing a thriving but ultimately doomed colony. Then, around the year 1000 CE, Eric's son, Leif Erikson, went further still, sailing hundreds of miles west and landing on a new, forested land the Norse called Vinland, now widely believed to be part of modern-day Newfoundland, Canada. This astonishing feat means Vikings established the first known European presence in North America, nearly 500 years before Columbus, a fact that rewrites traditional history, though their presence didn't last long. Due to conflicts with indigenous peoples and harsh winters, their journeys were about more than conquest. They were about the sheer possibility of the unknown, an insatiable desire to discover what lay beyond the edge of the world. But no age, however glorious or terrifying, lasts forever. By the mid-11th century, the Viking world was undergoing a profound and irreversible transformation. The widespread raids, once so common, began to fade as European defenses vastly improved. Castles rose along the coastlines. Fortified towns became more common, and organized resistance stiffened. The element of surprise, so crucial to Viking success, was vanishing. More significantly, the old pagan beliefs slowly gave way to Christianity. Missionaries, some arriving as captives, others as invited guests, gradually spread the new faith. Kings and chieftains began converting, often for political alliances, legitimacy, and peace with their powerful Christian neighbors. With religion came structure, and with structure came powerful, centralized monarchies in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Local chiefs were replaced by royal law, and raiding gave way to taxes. The wild independence that had once defined Viking society was slowly being reshaped by a new order. The final dramatic chapter is often considered 1066 CE, when the powerful Norse king Harald Hardrada sailed to England with dreams of reclaiming a throne, only to be defeated and killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Just weeks later, another invasion came, this time from William, Duke of Normandy, a direct descendant of Vikings, who conquered England, not as a raider, but as a crowned king. The cycle was complete. Though their reign of terror ended, their legacy endures profoundly in place names across Britain. In languages like English, words like knife, sky, window, berserk all come from Old Norse in bloodlines, and in the fiercely independent spirit that still echoes in the cold northern lands, a testament to a people who irrevocably changed the course of history. But what happens when an empire built on divine purpose and intricate order faces a threat from a world it didn't even know existed? Imagine a city built on water, more grand and sophisticated than any in Europe, a jewel of an empire that vanished almost overnight. What truly brought it down? Tenochtitlan, the awe-inspiring capital of the Aztec Empire, rose from the shimmering waters of Lake Texcoco like a dream, a true marvel of ancient engineering. Founded in 1325 CE, this sprawling metropolis boasted an ingenious network of canals, wide avenues, massive stone causeways connecting it to the mainland, and floating gardens called chinampas that provided abundant food. Its bustling marketplaces offered an incredible array of goods, from vibrant feathers and shimmering jade to exotic cacao and obsidian blades, in a city that was meticulously clean and orderly. At its heart stood the magnificent temple, Maya, a towering double pyramid dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. By the early 1500s, with over 200,000 inhabitants, it was one of the largest and most complex urban centers in the world, far surpassing many European capitals in both scale and sanitation. The Aztecs thrived through a highly structured society of nobles, priests, warriors, merchants, and farmers, intricate trade networks, and complex religious rituals, including human sacrifice, which, while central to their beliefs and maintaining cosmic balance, also bred deep resentment among their subjugated neighboring peoples. Underneath the veneer of power and ritual, old wounds and tensions simmered, waiting for an opportunity to explode. Then, in 1519, the unimaginable occurred. A small fleet of 11 ships appeared on the horizon of the Yucatan Peninsula, carrying Hernán Cortés, a Spanish conquistador with no royal title, no great army, and no official permission to conquer an empire. He brought just over 500 battle-hardened soldiers, a few terrifying cannons, and a handful of horses, beasts the Aztecs had never seen. Initially interpreted as monstrous centaurs, what Cortés lacked in numbers, he made up for in ruthless cunning, audacious ambition, and a dangerous charisma. His true genius lay not just in fighting, but in exploiting the deep-seated resentments of indigenous groups chafing under the brutal Aztec domination. Crucially, he gained the invaluable assistance of Malinche, also known as La Malinche or Malintzin, a native woman of extraordinary intelligence who became his multilingual translator, cultural guide, and closest confidant. Through her, Cortés could speak to the people, understand their complex social structures, and manipulate their fears, forging alliances that would ultimately prove the Aztec Empire's undoing. This was no simple conquest. It was a collision of worlds, a dance of misunderstanding and hidden agendas. On November 8, 1519, two men, representing two vastly different worlds, stood face to face for the first time. Cortés, armored and determined, flanked by foreign weapons and growing numbers of native allies, and Montezuma too, the divine emperor of the Aztecs, draped in feathers and gold, ruler of a city that shimmered like a jewel in the lake. As Cortés and his soldiers entered Tenochtitlan, they were genuinely stunned. The city stretched for miles, its white temples rising above turquoise canals, bustling marketplaces, and pristine avenues. It was cleaner, larger, and more sophisticated than any city they had seen in Europe. Some Spaniards whispered that they had walked into a dream. Montezuma welcomed them not with spears, but with elaborate ceremony and lavish gifts of gold, food, and precious cloaks. This was a moment of profound, tragic misunderstanding. For Montezuma, burdened by troubling omens, lightning striking, temples, mysterious visions in the sky, and seeking to avoid bloodshed, it was a diplomatic gesture of cautious welcome, perhaps even deference to what he perceived as a divine return or a fulfillment of ancient prophecies. For Courts, however, the reception was a clear sign of weakness, an invitation to seize control. The emperor, who had housed the foreign invaders in a royal palace, soon found himself a captive within his own walls. Courts, by placing Montezuma under house arrest, believed he now controlled the empire. For a fragile period, the illusion held. But beneath the shimmering surface of wealth and ritual, the seeds of disaster were already sown. An empire beginning its slow, quiet unraveling. The fragile peace shattered in a single, horrifying act of betrayal that ignited the city's fury. While Court Urs was away from Tenochtitlan, having marched to the coast to confront a Spanish rival sent to arrest him, he left his second-in-command, Pedro de Alvarado, in charge. Alvarado, a brutal and paranoid man, was not Courts. Driven by suspicion, he orchestrated a massacre during one of the Aztecs' most sacred festivals, Toxquetel, a ritual honoring the god Tezcatlipoca, as thousands of unarmed nobles, priests, and warriors gathered in full regalia in the temple mayor's courtyard. Performing ceremonial dances, the Spanish soldiers stormed in. They blocked the exits, then, without warning, began to kill, slashing through the crowd with swords and spears. The blood of the city's most honored citizens soaked the temple stones. It was not a battle, it was a horrific, unprovoked slaughter. The music stopped. Silence fell, then exploded into pure, unadulterated fury. When Courts returned days later, having overcome his rival, he found a city transformed. The Aztecs, once cautious, were now universally enraged. They surrounded the Spanish quarters, blocking the causeways, cutting off supplies. Tenochtitlan had become a trap, a boiling cage of stone and lake water. Montezuma, still a prisoner, was brought to the palace rooftop to calm his people, but they no longer listened. They saw him as a Spanish puppet. Stones were hurled. One struck the emperor in the head. Days later, he passed away in silence under Spanish watch, his death marking the final, irreversible break. On the night of June 30th, 1520, a date forever known as La Noche Triste, the night of sorrow's, Courts and his battered forces attempted a desperate escape. Under a moonless, rainy sky, weighted down by stolen gold and armor, they tried to slip out of the city across the narrow causeways. But the Aztecs were waiting, their fury unleashed. Warriors swarmed from canoes and rooftops, raining down arrows and spears. Greed proved deadly. Many Spaniards, too laden with treasure, drowned in the lake or were captured alive, their gruesome fate sealed atop the very pyramids they once marveled at. Hundreds of Spaniards and thousands of native allies perished in the chaos. Courts himself, watching his dream crumble, sat beneath a tree on the far shore and wept. Yet, even as the Spanish survivors limped away, a far more lethal enemy had already entered Tenochtitlan, an invisible killer that would finish what weapons could not. Smallpox, carried by a single infected man who had traveled with Courts. swept through the densely populated city, decimating the population. As many as half the inhabitants died, including Montezuma's brother and successor, Kuitlawak, who had bravely led the resistance. The empire was leaderless, its people weakened and demoralized by a plague they had no defense against, making it the decisive factor in the ultimate downfall. By August 1521, after a brutal 93-day siege, the once shining city of Tenochtitlan was a graveyard. The canals that once glittered with sunlight and trade now ran dark with filth and blood. The causeways were choked with bodies. The floating gardens withered in silence. Smoke rose from temples that had stood for centuries, starving, sick, and surrounded the Aztecs under their new, defiant young emperor, Cuauhtémoc, fought to the last. They resisted with sharpened stones, obsidian blades, and sheer, desperate will, turning temples into strongholds, every street a battlefield. But the relentless Spanish cannons, combined with the devastating effects of smallpox and overwhelming hunger, proved insurmountable. No help came, no miracle arrived. On August 13th, the fighting finally ceased. Cuauhtémoc was captured as he attempted a last-ditch escape by canoe. Brought before courts, he is said to have spoken with dignity. "I have done what was my duty in defense of my people. Now I am your prisoner. Take this dagger and kill me." Court S spared him for the moment, perhaps seeing value in a living symbol of conquest. But the city was utterly lost. Tenochtitlan, once home to over 200,000 people, was reduced to ashes and ruins. Its temples systematically looted, its sacred codices destroyed. Courts wasted no time. In its place, he began to build Mexico City, a new capital for a new colony, laid directly atop the bones of a fallen civilization. Yet, even in destruction, the Aztec spirit endured. Their language, Nahuatl, is still spoken by over 1 million people today, and its words like chocolate, tomato, avocado, and coyote have entered the global lexicon. Their intricate cultural echoes resonate in Mexico's art, food, and its people, a testament to the fact that while the conquest was swift, brutal, and devastating, it wasn't the end of the Aztec spirit. It was a painful transformation, but never a total erasure, a lingering legacy of resilience in the shadows of new power. But what about a conflict that scarred an entire continent? A war of unseen terrors and unexpected moments of humanity buried. Deep beneath the mud of Europe lay a world of unimaginable horror. The trenches of World War I, these were not merely battlefields. They were a way of life, a zigzagging network of damp earth, barbed wire, and perpetual decay that stretched for hundreds of miles from the Belgian coast to the Swiss Alps. When men first entered these ditches, they thought it would be temporary. Weeks, perhaps months. They found themselves trapped for years in a living tomb, often standing ankle-deep in freezing water for days. Their skin softening, blistering, and turning grey. This created trench foot, a horrifying condition that turned flesh numb, swollen, and eventually black, often requiring amputation. Above them, no man's land stretched, a desolate expanse filled with shell holes, shattered trees, and the unrecovered dead, silent witnesses to the carnage. The constant, sickening stench of unwashed bodies, human waste, wet earth, and decay became the very air they breathed. Rats, growing fat on fallen soldiers, swarmed everywhere. Lice burrowed into clothing and skin, causing constant itching and spreading disease. Even during periods of calm, death loomed. Snipers waited for any movement, and artillery strikes came without warning, turning stillness into instant, deafening chaos. In this grim existence, where machinery and madness reigned, the human spirit clung to unexpected lifelines. Mail call became a sacred, ritualistic event, a desperate connection to the world beyond the wire. A scrap of paper from home, from a wife, a sweetheart, a mother, a child, meant more than rations or rest. Soldiers wrote by candlelight. In damp dugouts, their words simple, sometimes poetic, often fragile, describing only the weather or small moments of calm, careful to omit the horrors to protect those back home. They treasured these letters, reading them once, then again, folding them carefully and tucking them into pockets near their chests. This tangible proof that someone still remembered them as people, not just numbers, was vital. But perhaps the most astonishing human moment occurred on Christmas Eve, 1914. Across the frozen, silent fields, German voices began to sing Still Nohut, Heilig Nohut. British troops, confused at first, then answered with their own carols. Without orders, without planning, men cautiously climbed out of their trenches, meeting in the deadly no-man's land. They shook hands, exchanged small gifts of tobacco, buttons, and chocolate, and even played impromptu games of football in the mud and snow, their rifles momentarily forgotten. For a brief, shining moment, there was no war, no enemy, only shared humanity. This spontaneous truce, quickly suppressed by furious high commanders, was never repeated on such a scale. But it remained a memory that refused to fade, a powerful testament to the enduring human longing for peace. Yet, beyond the bullets and the mud, the trenches harbored invisible terrors that tore at the mind. The most insidious and terrifying was the gas attack. It arrived like a strange, silent mist, drifting low to the ground, hugging the earth as though alive. There was no warning, no explosion, no roar, just a slow, unnatural fog, and then the agonizing coughing began. Chlorine, then deadly phosgene, and finally blistering mustard gas that corroded flesh, blinded eyes, and lingered in the soil for weeks. These chemical weapons made the very air the enemy. Gas burned the eyes and throat, turned lungs to liquid, and made the strongest men drop to their knees, gasping like drowning fish. Gas masks, strange, rubber-faced contraptions with bug-like goggles and long snouts, became a grim necessity. But they couldn't erase the constant, nagging fear. Even more profoundly, the relentless stress, the omnipresent threat of death, and the witnessed horrors birthed what was then called shell shock, what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Men returned home unable to speak, flinching at loud sounds, tormented by nightmares that never left them. Commanders often dismissed it as cowardice or a failure of character, but it was a deep, unseen wound that continued to maim and destroy. Lives long after the fighting stopped, leaving a generation broken in ways their families often couldn't comprehend. In this profound darkness, one thing shone brightest: comradeship. It was more than friendship. It was the very essence of survival. Men from every walk of life, farmers, factory workers, teachers, sons thrown together in the face of unspeakable horrors, formed bonds that transcended class, background, or nationality. One man's dry socks became another man's lifeline. One soldier's dark humor kept the whole group sane. They shared everything: cigarettes, blankets, meager rations, even the constant torment of lice. They passed down trench lore: which dugout stayed driest, which officer to trust, how to brew the best cup of tea over a candle flame. When the shelling stopped, even for just a moment, they would gather, mugs in hand, steam rising from chipped enamel cups filled with weak, gritty coffee or tea made from boiled rainwater. These moments were sacred. Men told jokes, sang songs that reminded them of home, played cards with worn decks, or simply sat in grateful silence, drawing strength from the mere presence of another human soul. They spoke of sweethearts and sisters, of favorite meals and summer days long gone. And when one of them fell, it wasn't just an anonymous name on a casualty list. It was a missing seat, a silence louder than the guns, a profound personal loss. This unbreakable bond, forged not in fire, but in frost, laughter, and shared suffering, was often the only thing that kept them going, providing the mental and emotional anchors in a world determined to dehumanize them. Finally, on November 11th, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the guns fell silent. The war to end all wars was officially over. But silence didn't bring immediate peace. Across the Western Front, soldiers emerged. From the trenches slowly, cautiously, not quite believing the deafening noise had truly ended. Some wept openly, others stood in stunned quiet. A few stared across no man's land, wondering if the men who had once fired upon them now felt the same strange emptiness. The trenches themselves didn't vanish overnight. They sat, abandoned, slowly sinking back into the torn earth, leaving behind scattered relics of lives once lived within their narrow walls. Rusted rifles, forgotten boots, unsent letters. And the men who emerged, they returned home, but they were irrevocably changed. Many struggled to reconnect with a world that had moved on without them. The familiar streets of their hometowns felt foreign. The laughter of children sounded distant. Some found comfort only in silence. Others were haunted by incessant nightmares, by invisible scars that festered deep within their minds. They told few stories, or none at all, because the ones who hadn't been there couldn't understand. The war had reshaped them, their posture, their sleep, their very sense of safety. Yet, from this profound trauma emerged an extraordinary resilience. Memorials rose, poppies bloomed in the battle-scarred fields, and new generations were born, forever linked to the quiet endurance of those who had faced the unending. The trenches have long faded from the land, but not from memory, a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for both horrifying destruction and quiet, unbreakable strength. From Lincoln's hidden sorrow and the Vikings' unexpected voyages across unknown oceans, to the Aztec Empire's tragic collision with a foreign world and the silent battles fought within the mud-soaked trenches of World War I. History is rarely as straightforward as we imagine. These untold stories and unseen struggles remind us that greatness doesn't require perfection, that courage can be found in the quietest moments, and that even the most brutal conflicts hold unexpected sparks of profound humanity. They challenge us to look beyond the surface, to question the myths, and to listen closely to the whispers of the past. For in these hidden histories, we find not just tales of what happened, but enduring lessons about human resilience, ambition, and the unbreakable spirit that continues to shape our world. What other profound truths, what other shocking revelations, might still be hidden in the annals of time, waiting to reshape our understanding of the world and ourselves?